July 1943. Somewhere in the unforgiving North Atlantic, Captain Eric Brown, the absolute undisputed master of British naval aviation, a man who will eventually log a record-shattering 2,407 aircraft carrier landings, climbs into the cockpit of a brand new fighter plane. Back at the Air Ministry, the bureaucrats are tearing this plane apart. They are calling it unsuitable for combat. They say it's too heavy, too slow, and complain that the cockpit is a cramped death trap. But as Eric Brown settles into the seat, he realizes the bureaucrats are completely wrong. This heavy, clunky-looking airplane possessed a hidden cheat code. Given the choice between flying this two-seat workhorse or a navalized version of the legendary glamorous Supermarine Spitfire, British carrier pilots consistently chose the heavier plane. Not because it was faster, not because it was prettier. They chose it because it could actually land on an aircraft carrier without killing them. But to understand why this so-called death trap became the Royal Navy's ultimate cheat code, you first have to look at the absolute bloody carnage happening on British carrier decks with the greatest fighter of the war, the Spitfire Massacre. The British had taken the greatest fighter of the war, the Supermarine Spitfire, and tried to turn it into a carrier plane called the Seafire. In the air, it was a fast, beautiful, agile dogfighter, but trying to land it was an absolute massacre. The Spitfire was designed for massive, flat grass airfields. Its landing gear was narrow and fragile. When you tried to smash that fragile gear down onto the violently pitching, bouncing steel deck of an aircraft carrier, the plane simply shattered. Worse, the Spitfire's long nose meant the pilot was essentially blind as he approached the deck. During the Salerno landings in September 1943, the numbers were terrifying. Out of 106 Seafires deployed, 58 were completely destroyed or rendered unserviceable within 48 hours. Almost none of those losses were from enemy fire. They were destroyed by the carrier deck itself. Pilots were snapping their landing gear, bouncing over crash barriers, and piling up in the hangars. The British desperately needed a machine built for the ocean, not a land plane forced to swim. But the solution the engineers came up with wasn't to make their new fighter lighter or faster. Counterintuitively, they made it heavier and crammed a second man inside. At first glance, this looked like a massive downgrade, but it was actually a response to a brutal lesson learned in the 1930s. The ocean keeps no records. The Firefly looked bizarre because it was a two-seat fighter. The Americans were flying single-seat Hellcats. The Japanese had the legendary Zero. So why did the British intentionally add weight? Because the ocean keeps no records. When flying a single-seat fighter over the featureless Atlantic, if you flew 20 miles away from your carrier, you were completely alone. You had to fly the plane, check for enemies, and calculate complex navigational math at the exact same time. One tiny math error, and you would spend all your fuel searching an empty ocean for your carrier, run out of gas, and simply disappear forever. The British solution was the two-seater. The pilot flew the plane and fought. The observer sat in the back, handled the radio, operated the radar, and navigated. They always knew how to get home. They could find their way home, but surviving the navigation was only half the battle. This heavy 14,000-pound beast still had to fight agile Japanese Zeros and actually land on a pitching deck. And that is exactly where the Firefly's invisible aerodynamic cheat code was finally activated. The cheat code. On paper, the Firefly was not impressive. Its top speed was only 316 miles per hour, but it possessed two massive advantages. First, huge fuel tanks. A Seafire could only stay airborne for about an hour and 20 minutes. The Firefly could loiter for hours. Second, the invisible cheat code, the Fairey-Youngman Flaps. These were massive flaps hidden flush inside the elliptical wing. When deployed in combat, they completely changed the aerodynamics of the aircraft. By increasing lift and dropping wing loading, this massive, heavy Firefly suddenly gained the ability to turn on a dime. In mock dogfights, the clunky British two-seater repeatedly turned inside captured Japanese fighters, completely stunning Allied observers. And when it came time to land, those same flaps allowed the Firefly to approach the carrier deck at a slow, incredibly stable 80 knots. It had wide, rugged landing gear. It hit the deck, hooked the wire, and stayed there. With its cheat code engaged, the plane the Bureaucrats officially declared unsuitable as a day fighter suddenly began doing the impossible, from the fjords of Europe to the steaming rice paddies of Asia. From Tirpitz to Tokyo to Korea. In 1944, Fireflies dove through heavy anti-aircraft fire to strafe the German battleship Tirpitz. By 1945, when kamikaze planes attacked the British fleet off Formosa, a single Firefly pilot and his wingman tore into a squadron of Japanese dive bombers, blasting 4 kamikazes out of the sky in minutes. They even became the first British aircraft to fly combat missions over Tokyo. But its most brutal test came during the Korean War. Operating off British and Australian carriers, they became devastating ground attack platforms. During the Australian deployment on the HMAS Sydney, they flew 2,366 sorties. 99 aircraft were hit by intense enemy ground fire. 9 were shot down. Yet, incredibly, not a single Firefly aircrew was killed. The rugged plane absorbed the punishment and brought its crews home. The Fairey Firefly didn't look like a Ferrari. It looked like a flying pickup truck. But when the carrier deck was pitching 15 feet in the air, the weather was closing in, and the fuel gauge was hitting empty, nobody wanted to be in a Spitfire. From the freezing Atlantic to the Pacific, the so-called cramped death trap proved to be exactly what the Navy needed, a machine that simply refused to fail. But the Firefly wasn't the only Allied machine in World War II that looked like a massive downgrade on paper, but secretly possessed a war-winning advantage. If you want to know why American tank crews actually preferred their ugly, boxy Sherman tanks over the legendary, terrifying German Tiger tanks, and the hidden engineering secret that made the Shermans so deadly, click on the video on your screen right now. I'll break down the entire mechanical rivalry. See you there.